Thank you so much for joining us. So I'm Catherine Bell, and I'm founder of the Awaken Company, and I'm with Russ Hudson, who is an Enneagram thought leader and also a very significant spiritual teacher. And so welcome and thank you for joining us. So today we will be going through stabilizing spirituality, and we will begin with a brief meditation, and then I have some questions for Russ. Before we begin, I just want everyone to acknowledge the land that we walk on. So for me, I'm on the traditional territories of Treaty 7 and the home of the Métis Nation Area Region 3. So I would just like everyone to just take a moment and acknowledge those who've walked before us. Thank you. So please have your eyes opened or closed, whatever suits you. And bring your awareness to the top of your head. Perhaps taking a few deep breaths. Often we're breathing from the top part of our lungs, so an invitation to breathe into the bottom sphere of our lungs and our belly. Now, bring your awareness to your eyes, to the back of your head, awareness to your throat, neck, front side and back side. Awareness to your shoulders, and an invitation to just relax your shoulders. Awareness to your right arm. Awareness to your right leg. Awareness to your left leg. Awareness to your left arm. Awareness to your torso. Front side of your torso, back side of your torso. And notice how amazing it is, the ability that we humans have to move our awareness from the front to the back to different places in our body. And awareness to our sit bones. And awareness back down through both of our legs to our feet. Bring your awareness to your feet. And with this awareness cascading through our bodies, perhaps noticing also the field around our bodies. Let's learn from Russ. Thank you, everybody. So, Russ, now is a particularly interesting time. You know, we're kind of through COVID or in the waves of COVID, and politically it's quite tumultuous. How would you recommend that people stay grounded in the midst of stress and anxiety?
Well, there are a number of angles to that question, and I'm sure it's something on everybody's mind. And there's a couple parts to it. One of them is that once the momentum of my ego patterns get going during the day, it's very hard to find the breaks. So whatever we do in the morning to give ourselves a little wiggle room during the day, that's a good thing. And if we take it on as an opportunity instead of an obligation, it tends to go better. I also think when we're having tumultuous times, to use your term there, I also take on the notion that by me focusing my attention in a certain way, I'm stabilizing things, not just for me, certainly for me, but also I start to carry another kind of atmosphere. And just as hysteria and paranoia and related problematic states of consciousness are contagious, so too is this grounded quality. So I need to do something. I need to commit to something I'm doing for myself early in the day when I'm first waking up to help me have a little, what do I want to say, money in the bank. Beyond that, there's two hard parts of it. As I said, there's momentum. So once that momentum's going, it's hard to remember that there is this other possibility. And hitting the brakes to that momentum is usually experienced by us as inconvenience. Like it's a pain in the butt. Oh, I got to do this now. I've got all this other stuff going on. Oh my God, I got to do this. We need to sort of hear that voice for what it is. We need to recognize that's the whole thrust of the egoic voices that keep the whole show going. And we have to be very specific and very simple. Specific means you don't get to your ground through vagueness. So, for example, a thing that we can always do, and that I was trained to do in my work, and I pass this on to all my students, we can always come back to our belly center by finding breath and sensation. And you can do that anywhere, anytime. You could be in the midst of a heated political debate, and suddenly, oh yes, breath and sensation. And I say sensation because we can be aware of a lot of things. We can go through our body just picturing it. That isn't it. When we say bring awareness to our body, if we're bringing awareness to the body's awareness, to put it that way, it manifests to our experience as sensation. When I was a young guy and first learning about all this, sensation was a mind blower. I had no idea how important it was. And the teachers I worked with, this was like the gold standard. But when we're in the rush of associations, and they're often anxiety based, when we're heated in various ways, when we're reacting to all the unfair and unpleasant things that happen in our world, we have become ungrounded from our rootedness in the here and now through the body. So the body is our homing device. It calls us home. And so it does so through sensation. Now, when I'm running around at work, or I'm dealing with my family, dealing with my kids, dealing with my partner, whatever, or I'm getting sucked into various new scary stuff that's coming to me through various media, that's precisely when I need to let that be a reminder, come home. And the simplest way to do that is to find my feet on the ground, not thinking about them, sensing them. Can I, right now, and that's the only time I can do it, can I sense my feet on the ground? I'm doing it right now. Yep, there they are. And to stick with that a moment, that will tend to have an effect on my breathing. As my breathing slows down, becomes a little more regulated, I get space from my reactions. Now, I don't think it's reasonable to expect ourselves to be free of reactions. We're going to have them. Things happen and they push our buttons. That's kind of a given. That's how our human nervous systems are set up, at least at this point in our evolution. However, we also have this ability to disengage from the reactivity, to taste it in a sense, to hold it so that another deeper impulse can come through. That has the effect both of grounding me so that I'm not getting swept into those reactions, not becoming a puppet to the things that are triggering me. And it also gives me the space to respond more compassionately and intelligently to what's going on rather than just do my usual thing. So this is something we can do every day. And I would just suggest anybody's serious about inner work, and anyone who wants to be, let's say, a force for grounding and releasing some of the huge amounts of reactivity that are in the world right now, that this would be a really helpful ongoing practice. If you get here, you find your feet, find your breath, then we'll see what happens from there. That's simple. You can do it anywhere. It doesn't look weird. You can be on the elevator and do this. You can be at a business meeting and do this. It doesn't require strange chanting or anything else. Just something that is available to us all the time.
What a great suggestion, Russ. And I'm going to apply it tonight when I go to the grocery store. Feel my feet. So the next question we have is, how would you suggest that people fall in love with their inner solitude?
That's an interesting question because it's got several components to it that people may or may not understand. Well, inner solitude, let's start there. When we get more grounded, the surprising thing is we start to feel more space, internal space. When we're not grounded, we're just in our kind of reaction machine, we don't feel spacious. We feel crowded. We feel, buffeted around by the events of life, by other people, by their expectations. That's pretty much how, life tends to be. But we have access just beneath the surface to this deeper ground. This deeper ground has spaciousness, stillness, quiet, etc. At first, that can be daunting to a lot of us because we're used to activity, we're used to noise, we're used to being identified with the activity of our thoughts and our feelings, our emotional reactions, all the different stuff we're doing. So that this kind of quiet in the middle of it can be kind of weird at first. It's not what we expect. But there's a way in which we learn through experience. Not only is that stillness, that inner aloneness, restorative, it restores my clarity of mind, restores my heart. It's part of being grounded, but it also, weirdly, even though it's a kind of aloneness, it is the vehicle through which I actually encounter other people. It's how I actually meet others for real, not as just a collision of my self concepts with my concepts of you, or your concepts of you with your concepts of me. You know, when we're in that solitude, that's where we actually meet. That solitude is a sign of the arising of intimacy. And by intimacy, I don't just mean, romantic intimacy. It could be there, but it's not only that. It could be intimacy with nature, it could be intimacy with just with myself, with the morning, with my cup of tea or coffee or whatever I'm drinking. So there's a way in which it's not like we talk ourselves into it. I mean, you can try. We can give ourselves a pep talk or two, but really, that solitude and stillness, internal quietude, is when love has its way with us, two become one. And that oneness is experienced as this kind of solitude. There is nobody else here bugging me, tricking me, seducing me, deceiving me, whatever. It's just dropped into this intimacy. So that's a big part of it. And I think we learn to love it because we start to see it. A, it's closer to who we really are. And B, it just organically happens that way. This is what those great Sufi poets and Christian mystics refer to as the beloved. The beloved ain't another person necessarily, although we might experience the beloved initially through another person. But after a while, even especially if you're with them for a while, you kind of get that they're representing something that's more internal. Now, what I also want to say, though, is that solitude helps us not other people. Sometimes there's people on our side, so to speak, and sometimes they appear not to be. Sometimes, people are taking a very different view than the one we are. That doesn't mean that our views don't matter. It doesn't mean that we should give up our views altogether. But there's a way that we communicate very differently when we're not othering people. And when we're more tapped into that silent solitude place, we're not turning people into something bad, not turning them into other. Now, obviously, we start practicing that with people with whom we don't have a war or a history of trauma or things like that. We start with people, just regular people in our life. But we're learning a way of being with people and being with the ride of being a human being in this world with less of that reaction and less of that tendency to make people or animals or anything else for that matter into other. But you can't do that mentally. That's not a mental gymnastics thing. It's done through this experience of, let's say, intimacy as that solitude. It's the best I can put it right now.
Yeah, thank you, Russ. So let's say I'm really activated by somebody or something, or by a radically different perspective than I have. How would you suggest that I maintain grace and kindness during challenging situations? The not othering is one, but what else would, I know you have many suggestions.
We tend to lose context when we're in challenging situations. That's part of it. But I'll tell you a funny thing about that. I find that I arrive in context, the bigger holding the situation, not through generalities. This goes back to what I was saying about practice, but by being present to the specifics of the situation. Our position doesn't allow for the specifics, nor does it allow for the larger context. But I find that when I'm wiggling my toes, the specifics of the situation, when I'm really tasting the nuance of what's here, it puts me in a different relationship with what's happening.
Mm,
I'm going to certainly be less triggered. And most importantly, I'm less afraid, because so much of what triggers us in these situations where we feel overwhelmed or is that we're scared. And that's not crazy. That's a pretty normal human thing. And my goodness, there's so much in life that can trigger our anxiety. And there are plenty of things that are going to make us feel overwhelmed, uneasy, and um, reactive, right? So one thing that happens by paying attention to the specifics, I find that it's part of the process of transmuting anxiety into attention, attentiveness. When I'm breathing, grounded, centered, have some relationship with that quieter place, and I don't, the other trick is to stay with that, because usually what happens is we touch it for a moment and then our ego goes, good, did that, now what? But we want to stay with it. If we do that, we start to pay more attention to what's actually here right now. And that
mm,
includes paying attention, noticing the thoughts that are running through our head. If we notice them, we're not identified with them. We're not
mm,
stuck in them. And so in that framework, that fear starts to be transmuted into that capacity to pay attention to what's happening. Fear means pay attention.
mm,
I think biologically, we were conditioned, as a lot of animal life has been, to have fear as a trigger to be attentive. You know, if you're a deer, and suddenly you hear something in the bushes, wow, you're paying attention, right? And so if we look at things that are potentially scary, overwhelming, as reminders to pay attention, that changes our relationship with them.
mm,
So that's what I endeavor to do. You know, when I've been in a few traumatic situations in my life, some personal and individual, some collective. You know, here in New York City on September 11th, I was in Egypt during the breakout of the revolution, and in 2011. What is that number 11? I don't know. Uh, but I'd just say that a number of times I've been in situations, I was in a plane that was crashing. There is this way of focusing your attention where you're grounded, breathing, catch your breath, find your breath, and pay attention to where you are. And suddenly that fear becomes, it sort of becomes a platform that launches me into an effective relationship with what's going on. And I
mm,
have never found that to fail. And
mm,
sometimes it happens even we're not thinking about all this. Something in us just intuitively knows to do that. So I bet, you know, many of us who are on this little gathering right now, you know, listening to each other talking, you probably had those experiences. So as you get as you get some disturbing news from online or from wherever you get your news from, or there's some discouraging notion, let that be a reminder. Find my feet, breathe, find that solitude, and let it be a trigger to this activation of a in the moment attention. We have a lot more capacity to deal with things than we think we do. We are way more capable of handling things than we generally assume. And again, look at your own history. You'll see examples of this in your own life, I'm sure.
mm. Yeah, I know for me, Rest, when you said get in touch with the specificity, for me, that involves really paying attention to my senses. So what am I seeing? What am I smelling? What am I tasting? What am I hearing? What am I feeling? And then that drops in something else. Um, so what other practices would you suggest for people to really connect with themselves, with their own being during this time?
Taking quiet times for yourself at certain times of day is a good one, where you take some time to find your sensation, find your breath and so forth. But as a kind of counterweight to that, to talk about things that actually matter to you. I don't mean just complaining about, job situations or your relationship or what have you. I mean, that might come up, but I mean, if we consider that we just get to be here on planet Earth for a limited time, there's only a certain amount of time we get to be here no matter what we do, right? That's much as a certitude. But I'm here now, and you're here now, and we're here now. It's taking a certain lead in speaking from where I am, not just becoming a puppet to my egoic top 10 hits.
Mhm, mhm.
We all know what those are. All our friends know what those are.
It's true.
Okay, here he goes again. But, but to actually trust that we could communicate about something that matters to us, something bigger picture. And this isn't just about convincing somebody of something I read in a book.
Yeah.
About communicating from a more total place. If we've really, as I said, if we've really found some of that grounding in solitude, the flip side of that is the solitude is the doorway to real connection. So if there's real connection, why not have some real communication? I always feel better if I can be really, freaked out by something. And, I'm a 5 on the Enneagram, so we're in the fear triad. So, I get kind of overwhelmed here and there, where I certainly have in my life. But I find that, getting grounded, doing the practices that we've talked about, they're pretty basic. I like to keep practices simple so I can do them anywhere. But also just this whole miracle of connection, of,
Mm.
of being able to listen to each other. I was watching that movie, Don't Look Up, and which, some people like, some people don't like. It's got a lot of really broad humor in it and so forth. But the magnificent part of that movie, my favorite part of it, is the end. The end of it, when, I don't want to say too much because some of you may not have seen it, but there's a really difficult situation unfolding, and a group of friends has gathered to have a meal, and they're just not knowing what's going to happen. They talk about real stuff, and that becomes a very sacred thing. I don't think we know in our society how to really communicate with each other anymore. We
Mm.
don't know how to just speak from our being, from our heart to each other, and to receive what the other person is saying. So many of the exercises that I lead in Enneagram workshops have to do with speaking from your being and listening to someone else doing that. I think that's a huge support. And, we don't know where the world's going. We may pull a rabbit out of the hat here, and we may be signed up for a very difficult period of history. It's hard to say right now. We're all praying and hoping for the best. But I also think that beyond whatever things we're contributing to, giving money to, giving time to, all those are good and holy things to do. There's also just our being here in a certain way with each other and creating this other kind of network of human connection is maybe one of the helpful things we can do.
Mm.
Whether or not we recognize it all the time, there are forces operating within human consciousness. Now, you want to think about those in traditional way, like angels and devils, you can, but you could also just think of them as like memes, as trends, as mind viruses, but also as just psychological impulses. Since the dawn of history, people have tried to understand why humanity periodically goes through periods of mass insanity. And there are various suggestions. Some say it's planetary. Some say it's the force of various kind of non-human consciousness. I think it's all interesting as theories. but it's enough for me to just notice that these things happen. These trends occur. And I do have, and I believe we all have the ability to discern what we want to hook up into. And that what we're yielding and just mouthing off the usual fear-based stuff, we're part of a certain force. We're contributing to something. Whereas when we're being grounded, speaking from our heart and soul to each other in the way I was just suggested, we're serving something else. One of the great ideas in the tradition, and Don Riso, my old writing partner, used to love this idea, is that it's like the old Bob Dylan song, you got to serve someone. Like no matter what we do, we're serving something. So there's this, as we're getting more present and learning to be grounded and finding that quiet place, we can also think of it as choosing what we're serving, what our life is in service to. So that can be a helpful way of looking at it for a lot of us.
Wow, that's powerful, Russ. Kind of stop and what are we serving? And then it also invites in the sense of play. So
Yeah.
we are at time. So I just want to say thank you to everybody who's listening to us. We will send you the recording and an invitation to enable and enact the practices that Russ has suggested to us, to feel our feet, to stop, and to engage with the world in a different way. So thank you so much and join us again. Bye for now, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us. More to come, I hope. Be well. Thank you.